What's the loneliest thing you've ever done? I was homeschooled most of my life, but ultimately I was just used as free childcare for my 3 little brothers. I didn't have any friends from ages 13–21. I remember sitting outside at night when I was 17 and talking to the stars, skeptical smiley face. Be married. Took my sleeping pills just because they made me hallucinate characters and animals for about 30 minutes before I pass out, and I didn't want to be alone. On my days off I walk around my city aimlessly. I take myself out on dates, and although it gets really lonely at times, I don't hate being alone. I also wrap my hands around my shoulders and give myself a self-cuddle, it's really soothing. At around maybe 8–10 years old, I used to spend my recesses and lunch times in the bathroom stalls at school, because I didn't want to be daunted by people staring at me in any of the open areas outside, knowing full well they knew I didn't have friends. It felt more comforting and less lonely in there for some reason. Living my current life. Definitely one time cried while watching infomercials at 3 a.m. about how my favorite sweater was basically my only friend. 2009 ordered pizza and stayed at home solving calculus problems while watching Twilight. To be honest, that was a pretty great night. First I moved to the UK by myself. Definitely a challenge getting outside your comfort zone, probably felt lonely for a few months as I didn't know anyone there. But I was living in London and didn't want to spend Christmas by myself as I didn't have family, so I decided to buy last-minute trip to Nepal and went to hikes Annapurna by myself. Spent Christmas, my birthday and Nai in the mountains middle of nowhere. Such a rewarding holiday, but definitely lonely, and would have loved to share it with someone. Was a third wheel at my own party. Went to meet up with friends. None of them showed up, happened multiple times. You guessed it, not friends anymore. Went on vacation for a week and stayed in the house the whole time while everyone went out partying, meeting old relatives, and having a good time. Going to the movie theater alone makes you feel really weird. Spent Christmas Eve alone. Smoked AJ, watched Schindler's List. It was nice. My kids were with their dad that year, we take turns, so it was my first and only Christmas Eve all alone. I went to the movie theater by myself after class and then had dinner in my dorm room. I used to also lock myself in the dorm room on the weekends because I had no one to eat with. I was emotionally and mentally beaten down by the end of 2019. For the first time in my life, I didn't celebrate Christmas Eve with my family and wasn't able to meet and celebrate the first few hours of Christmas. What I did was I slept through it, woke up at 12:48 a.m., and what's worse was that I was late for work and my supervisor was skeptical and doubted that I overslept. Every night I cuddle my huge stuffed fox. Sometimes I'll think too much and cry myself to sleep, cold sweat smile. I've always slept by myself, so I don't know the comfort of others. Never even cuddled a human or pet before. Downloaded that replica chatting bot thingy just to see if I could still use words LMAO. Things got so bad with my mental health, even commenting on a Reddit post seemed too much. Christmas and New Year's Eve by myself because I had to work and my family went to visit the rest of my family in another state. It was only shitty because I didn't prepare a meal and I was working from 3 to 11 p.m. Also a trip to Europe by myself, but that was really nice. I opened the window to hear sounds of people. I once spent New Year's Eve completely alone at home. I was quite depressed at that time and it was not a nice evening. Pensive face. I mean, I don't care too much about it, but being totally alone that night was definitely not something I want to do again unless I'm in a good place and actively decide to spend time on my own. I turned 30 recently and it was a big day for me. My roommate was sweet and got me a cake and everything. But in the end it was just me drinking into the night, eating my cake. Was a weird feeling, like I had lost my younger self and was crossing over to something grander. Cheers to getting older, wiser and enjoying one's own company. Christmas Eve. I spent it alone in my bedroom crying. Called my ex. Taking the train to a city 2 hours away and immediately took the train back so my roommates wouldn't think I'm home all the time with no friends. To be fair, I love taking the train and I could finish a lot of work on my laptop, but still pretty pathetic. A few years ago I moved house on my own, few car trips on my birthday. It was after a breakup. That felt like a very lonely, low point to me. My parents were away and I didn't have anyone else I could have asked for help. I was moving into a shared house and I didn't tell them it was my birthday as I didn't want them to pity the new lonely lady. Lol. On the upside, lifting all my belongings gave me a good workout. I was in high school and I had an extracurricular thing after an hour and a half of the school day. I always used to be with classmates during this time, but for some reason that day all my friends left. There was a restaurant across the street from the school, so I went there and sat in a sunny spot with my food, and I sat on IG for the whole hour and a half. Was pretty cool actually. Lol. ETA, this is not nearly as lonely as what others wrote, but this was one of the only times I actually had no one to go to, be with. Wrote a sexually suggestive whisper post just to know what it felt like to receive tons of messages. I put on my favorite pajamas and listened to the I Am 16 Going on 17 song from The Sound of Music, except I was doing the guy's part about 17 going on 18. It was the eve of my 18th birthday and had just got a text from my ex-best friend that she didn't want to speak to me ever again. It's been lonely ever since, I miss her sometimes. I went to cinemas alone, also often celebrated my birthday completely alone, same applies for Christmas. Great times. I watched a lot of horror movies alone and ate pizza the whole day. For Valentine's Day this year, I smoked weed by myself to lift my spirits a bit and stood in the middle of my kitchen eating Chinese takeout with only the fairy lights on. Drank a glass of wine afterwards. I went to the cinema to watch the last Twilight movie alone, because no one wanted to go with. Fair enough. Walked down to the beach to watch the fireworks on Nai by myself. AHHA. Wrapped myself a Christmas gift for next year's using items I already have at home. I didn't have much money on hand because my family chose to not celebrate it with me. I ate with our next door neighbor. Had to cry during Christmas Eve and that was the lowest point in my life. Also had severe depression. Go to the restaurant. Today while I was playing the piano, I did a pretty good job if I say so myself, but no one heard it, so I just clapped to myself. I have a maternity pillow to cuddle with. Went to movies alone once cause no one wanted to watch it with me. Was squished between two quite old couples that wouldn't stop bickering. Not enjoyable. No phone calls or texts all day long. Mediation in a divorce. I was fighting for my kids and everything I had ever owned. It was horrible that everything boiled down to a office visit. My lawyer sucked and hadn't prepared me. Listen to my favorite music by myself because nobody likes it. After a trip to Paris for school, I took the train to London on my own, as I had never been there before. I booked a hotel, stayed 3 days by myself. I went out to eat every night alone, went to museums, shopped alone, sat in cafes reading alone. It was lonely as fuck, but somehow I really enjoyed the peace and independence. It was my first time traveling completely solo, and I can't wait to do it again. Sometimes sleep with a blanket rolled up spooning me. Lol. But I've lived on my own for 3 years now and don't really feel lonely anymore until I haven't talked with another person in several days. Decided a long time ago to just plan for nothing to happen on my birthday, then try to make plans the next weekend. That way if the plans don't form or the day isn't perfect I'm not nearly as let down. Years ago when I ended up living somewhere I hated, I had a crap job with crappy co-workers and a crappy boss, deep in debt and my marriage wasn't going well. Found out later he had a major hormone imbalance, but at the time I thought he couldn't stand me. I felt so alone and unwanted I had a foolproof suicide plan. I even told someone who could have, should have, knew how to intervened and they did nothing, which made me feel even worse. Ended up going to a therapist, who immediately recommended I see my doctor and ask for medication, which ultimately saved my life in many ways. So I guess the loneliest thing I've ever done is strongly and seriously consider suicide. I spent Thanksgiving alone when I was 23. I had just gotten back from a close high school friend's funeral, my medication was giving me suicidal thoughts, and my boyfriend at the time was completely emotionally unavailable. To stave off the depression, I went to Walmart and bought everything to make a full Thanksgiving feast. I spent all day cooking in my tiny apartment kitchen. When it came time to eat, I couldn't manage more than 3 bites before I broke down crying. For some reason, the worst part was that when I was checking out at the store, I tried making small talk with the cashier. "Hey, how is your day going?" She completely ignored me, wouldn't even make eye contact. Never had I felt so invisible and so alone. It was my 18th birthday. Every year since my birth, I had spent my birthday with my grandma as we had the same birthday. She died a few months prior that year. My entire family were either working or not at home, and my then boyfriend forgot about our plans. So there I was, my first birthday without my grandmother, all alone at home. 18 was not a good birthday. The first Christmas after my ex-husband and I broke up, I had the kids for the morning and he came to get them at noon. Cleaning up the wrapping paper and presents alone after my kids left was pretty bad. I was living abroad and things weren't working out the way I'd hoped. I spent my 21st birthday broke and completely alone. I didn't have any friends at the time and nobody wished me a happy birthday. When I called my mom in floods of tears, she told me, "Love, if you haven't felt confused and alone in your 20s, you're not really living. This isn't forever. Do something nice for yourself today." I took myself for a walk and thought about all the brave and big and sometimes really bad choices I'd made that had led me to that point, and I knew I was going to be okay. And it was. My freshman year of college was really tough. I was lucky enough to have a group of 5 or so people but didn't really hang out with them much of the week. Normally like 1 day a week. Other than that, I pretty much spent all my time alone. To make myself feel better, I used to go out in the cold and sit by the lake and just stare out into it. I felt so alone, and that was one of the few things that comforted me. Looking back, it was actually one of my favorite things to do, even though it was during one of the hardest times.